Heavenly Father, we thank Thee from our hearts for the inspiration from Thee. Father, we know right now that we are Thy children. Help us to retain this consciousness, that we may feel Thee and know our oneness with Thee in every action. Bless each one of us. We bow to Thee, to the Great One, and the Beloved Master. Om. The subject this evening is man is not as he appears. Man is not as he appears. In the duality of consciousness in which we live, the soul is attached to this action, to this life. Then it is known as the ego. And as the ego, it is tied to the body. And so this makes the soul appear as man. And so you can see that really man, which is the soul, is not as he appears. Really, the soul is quite different from man as we see him. Now, some people are almost angels, and others are devils, so to speak. And yet, behind each one is the soul. The soul which is entirely different from the man as we see him. And as we look at these two types, or the several types of man, from those who are saints to those who are criminals and so forth, we must not forget that each one, whether he be an angel or a sinner, is attached to God, is in tune with God by two attunements. We will come to that just in a moment. Because man is really not as he should be. As we discussed last meeting, Patanjali said, get out of the delusion that you are the body. Cut out the mental cancer, which makes you think that you are the body, which is so entirely different from the soul. And Jesus said, take no heed of the body, showing that that is not the real part of it. Jesus did not say, take no heed of thy soul. And Lord Krishna, in the Gita, the third discourse, we read words to the effect that tell us that we must get out of the delusion Lord Krishna says, "O Arjuna, get out of my delusion." And we read in this third discourse these words: "It is desire, desire begotten by the quality of motion, all consuming, all polluting. Know thou this as our foe here on earth." This desire is the thing that keeps us in delusion, because one desire is satisfied and another comes up. There's no end to it, because the satisfaction does not lie in outward consciousness through the fulfillment of desire, but it lies in the soul itself. And that's why Lord Krishna said, "Get out of my delusion." Now Lord Shankara gave us the positive aspect when he said, I am he, blissful spirit, I am he." And so you see, man is surely, in most cases, not that blissful spirit. He is not as he should be. In duality, as I have said, the soul is attached to the body and appears as man. But in spite of this attachment, in spite of the fact that we cannot recognize many times the soul as we look upon different human beings, in spite of that, man is always in touch with God. Although it may be in an unconscious way, still he is always in touch with God through two attunements, through two channels, we might say. Now, what are those attunements? The first is through the unconscious mind. This mind functions through the Ira and Pingala currents of the superficial spine, the physical counterpart of which is the sympathetic nervous system. Now these Ira and Pingala currents branch into the 5 pranas, the 5 subtle electric currents, which carry on the vegetative functions of the body, as the breath, circulation, assimilation, excretion, and such things. These are carried on by the 5 pranas through the unconscious mind, mistakenly called the subconscious mind. But this attachment, or rather this attunement, goes on. We are not conscious of these processes of digestion and circulation, assimilation, and so forth, but they go on just the same. Why? Because God is flowing through those channels. But of course it is in an unconscious way. This attunement is automatic. But through the practice of self-realization fellowship yoga, we can make these 2 currents and the 5 pranas dynamic to consciousness. Then they are not automatic, but become visual, and we know them, we perceive them. Now the second attunement is the fact that the soul consciousness, which of course is the presence of God within us, we are always in contact with that. Of course, in an automatic way, in an unconscious way. Now this soul consciousness or God within us, is in the deep spot, in the Sushumna. And I might add that the strength of the current in the Sushumna determines one's subtle power. And also in passing, the current in the era or Pingala currents of the first attunement determines the state of bodily health. And now in the second attunement, when we are always in touch with God, although in an unconscious way, we have to go there, especially in sleep. Every night in sleep, the eyes close and finally turn up toward the Christ center as we go back to God. That attunement is always there, but in most of us, in an unconscious way. However, in meditation, deep meditation, then this attunement, as well as the first attunement of the era and Pingala currents of the spine, they become dynamic to consciousness, or you can perceive them. Also in the state of conscious deep sleep, wherein visions appear, then that presence of God through these two attunements is dynamic to consciousness. If we read the Bible, especially in Daniel, the 10th chapter, 9th verse, Zechariah, the 4th chapter, the 1st verse, Ezekiel, the 1st chapter, 28th verse, the 3rd chapter, 23rd verse, we read here instances of vision, spiritual perception. And in these cases, the prophet says, I was in the state of deep sleep. Now, self-realization fellowship yoga produces this state of deep sleep in a conscious way so that we can perceive the presence of God within us. So remember, no matter how degraded the individual is, each one of us is in tune with God, or is rather attuned to God with inseparable ties, two inseparable ties. That is why all will go back to God, as Ramakrishna said, because these ties are never broken, no matter how degraded we become. They are inseparable ties to the infinite. Through self-realization fellowship yoga, these attunements, which up to this time have been automatic or unconscious, become dynamic to our consciousness. Because SRF yoga removes all inhibiting causes and allows the enjoyment of spiritual perception through the intuition of the soul. Allows us to see man as he is. Now, intuition is the power of universal sight and the omniscience of God. It says in Matthew, if thine eye be single, thy body will be filled with light. Through intuition, we become one with the single eye. In other words, we see through the universal eye of God, and then we know man is not as he appears. This single eye is not just the reflection of the medulla center which you see at the Christ center. The single eye is the universal power of sight and the omniscience of God, which is inherent in every particle of his creation. If we merge with that universal power of sight, which also is coextensive with space, and the omniscience of God, then, as God's sight is everywhere, and His omniscience is everywhere, so our sight and our omniscience becomes God's universal sight and omniscience. Because we are made in the image of God. We are His children. We have to break the delusion which separates us from God. Now we come to the question, why cannot we see our inseparable tie with the infinite? These two attunements which are always there, connecting us to God. The answer is, literally, we are not still long enough. We are not at rest. As long as there is movement, and we are attached to that movement, we cannot see the ocean of spirit, so to speak, underlying the waves of outward action. We should never forget the illustration the Master has given of the wave and the ocean. It is only at the rest point in this movement of the ocean of spirit that we can perceive the inseparable tie which unites us with spirit. These rest points are very, very important, because you must remember it is the wave, or rather as the wave rises and falls, the ocean of spirit does not change. As we watch the wave rolling along in the ocean of spirit, it seems as if it moves in the direction that it is going. But really, the ocean of spirit does not move. The ocean of spirit simply rises and falls. It is the wave that moves. This is easily illustrated by looking at the ocean, and you can see a barrel or a log floating there. As the wave comes along, the barrel simply rises and falls. It does not move with the wave. And so with the log. As the wave rises and falls and passes along, the log stays still. You can see the ocean itself does not move. It is the illusion of the rising and falling of the ocean which gives us the idea of movement. But there is a point between each wave, in the trough of the wave, where it is still, for a moment even. At that point, at that rest point, you are one with the whole ocean of spirit. And every rest point is connected with every other rest point in that ocean of spirit. And so you can see that if we can contact those rest points and not be identified with the rise and fall of the waves, the movement of the waves, then we can realize our oneness with the ocean. But as long as we are identified with the rise and fall of the ocean, with the movement of the ocean, we cannot realize that we are not that wave, but the underlying ocean. This is a very important metaphysical point. At these rest points, there are two fundamental facts to remember. The universal omniscience of God and the cosmic power of sight is available in these rest points. That's the first fact. The universal omniscience of God and the cosmic power of sight are one and the same thing, just like the fire and the burning power of the fire are the same. The second fact is this. at rest at each point, or at these rest points. Each one is inseparable from every other rest point, because at those rest points you perceive the one underlying ocean of spirit. And therefore, this gives you universal contact. Contact just for a moment, these rest points. And you'll find that in that moment, you perceive eternity. That's why intuitional experiences are just in a flash. Visions sometimes are just in a flash. Because that rest point is only for a moment. But even if it is only for a moment, you can perceive eternity. Because in that rest point, there is no time or space. There is no time or space in God. The ocean of spirit is timeless. It's the movement of the ocean that gives time and space. And so, in conclusion, the secret key to know what man really is, that he is a son of God, is innate in all. Especially it is known through Kriya Yoga. It is through rest, that is stopping the movement of the various breaths, the physical, the astral, and the mental breath. It is at these rest points, no matter how small it may be, no matter how small the rest may be, it is here that we contact God and know that man is not as he appears. What's more, just to remind you again that flashes of intuition, which we all perceive at various times, come at these rest points. That's why they are flashes. Phenomena, especially visions, they come and are usually of very short duration, because in God there is no time or space. The movement of the waves of our mind and consciousness stop just for an instant. Then we perceive God in eternity, and then the wave goes on and we are identified with it. That's why these things are so short-lived. But through the regular practice of Kriya Yoga, through following the path of the Master, which he has given us through great sacrifice and love for us, we can increase these rest points so that these flashes of intuition and these visions become of longer duration, until finally, when we still all the waves of the various breaths, then, as the Master says, then we have God. These eternal truths, especially about the rest points, which Larry Marsha emphasized so much, these eternal truths are very deep. But if you meditate upon them, you will see that underlying all wave action is the one ocean of spirit, the one ocean of God's love, the movement of which and our attachment to that movement causes all the delusion. We have to break that delusion. Finally, through self-realization fellowship yoga and devotion, we finally become one with the great ocean of God's power and love. We become one with that forever and forever. Because once we contact it, we realize eternity. Eternity simply means forever and forever. Why? Because in that ocean of God's love, when there is no movement, there is no time or space. And so once contacting that, we will realize that we are one with God throughout eternity. And so man really is not as he appears. Man appears as he is because of attachment to this outward life in which we find ourselves. But once you break that attachment, once through your own effort, the intercession of the beloved Master, and the grace of God, you reach one of those rest points, and you see even a glimpse of the great ocean of spirit. And you will realize that you are one with that ocean of spirit. Then you will know really what man is. When you contact the infinite at a rest point, and especially when the spiritual lightning crashes upon you, then you will realize the futility of being engrossed in outward consciousness, of being moved and disturbed by the accusations of others and their ill will. Because at the rest point, or in God's eternity, it does not exist. Only then, as the Gita says, can we be eternally freed from pain. When you feel the presence of God, when you feel His great all-encompassing love, then all the dross in the heart is removed. And then you see just the one flame of His presence. And you realize that all others are simply rays of that one flame of God. And then only can you really carry out the second commandment, which says, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." God is the great light, the cause and end of all things. And we are simply rays of that great light. As the Master once wrote to me, he said, "Child of eternal lightning, go forward, go on. Think nothing of this outward life. Forget the body. Forget this drama of life. It is transient. It is but a play of God's great consciousness." And when you realize through His grace that you are one with the eternal lightning, not in imagination, but in actuality, then you realize there is only one thing that exists, one thing that is worth striving for, and that is God alone. And when I say God alone, I mean the great love of God, for that is the cause and end of all things. Love is the greatest force in the universe. It is God Himself, for it says in the Bible, God is love. Through self-realization, yoga, realize that great unity of consciousness, the love of God. And then you will not only realize that man is not as he appears, but also you will realize and know that man really is a child of God, made in His own image, a ray of His infinite light.